Constructors are an important feature of object-oriented programming in Java. They are responsible for initializing the state of the object, including any instance variables that define the properties and attributes of the object. The constructor has the same name as the class and is called using the new keyword when an object is created. Constructors can take parameters, which are used to initialize the object states, or they can be parameterless if no initialization is required. Here are the types of constructors in Java. Default constructor. This is a constructor that takes no arguments. If a class does not define any constructors, the compiler will automatically generate a default constructor. We have the class person, which has two variables, string name and private int age. In this class, we have a constructor, which is a default constructor that will initiate or take by default the name equals to unknown and the age equals to 30. So every time we initiate or we call a new object of type person, this object will have the name equals to unknown and the age equals to 30 by default. Parameterized constructor. The parameterized constructor is a constructor that takes arguments or some parameters. In this case, we have the example of class person, in which we have variable name, which is a string, and the constructor person that takes an argument of string name. In this case, every time we create an object of class or of type person, we're going to initialize its name to the name in the argument, which is given by the user. Copy constructor. This is a constructor that takes an object of the same class as an argument and creates a new object with the same states as the argument object. It's used to create a new object that is a copy of an existing object. So, in this case, we have the class person, and the class person has a constructor person that takes the argument of the same class, so person. It's used to create a new object that is a copy of an existing object. Private constructor. This is a constructor that is declared as private, so in this case we have private singleton as a private constructor, that in this case it does nothing, but it's for the example. And private constructors are commonly used in singleton design patterns. They are also used in the object of preventing other classes from initiating the class. Constructor overloading. It's a feature in Java that allows a class to have multiple constructors with the same name, so with the same name of the class, but with different parameter list. In other words, you can define multiple constructors with the same name as long as they have different arguments. When an object is created using a constructor, Java looks for the constructor with the matching parameter list. If no matching constructor is found, a compilation error occurs. Here's an example of constructor overloading in Java. In this example, the rectangle class has three constructors. The first constructor is a default constructor that initializes the width and height to 0. The second constructor is a parameterized constructor that takes one argument, which is used to set the width and height to the same value. The third constructor is a parameterized constructor that takes two arguments, which are used to set the width and height to different values. With constructor overloading, you can create objects of the rectangle class using any of the three constructors. Best practices for using constructors. Here are some best practices for using constructors in Java. Keep the constructors simple. Constructors should be used to initialize the state of an object and should not contain complex logic or calculations. Complex operations should be performed in separate methods. Provide default values for instance variables. If an instance variable is not initialized in a constructor, it's automatically assigned a default value by Java. However, it's a good practice to provide default values in your constructors to make your code more explicit and easier to understand. Use parameterized constructors. Parameterized constructors allow you to provide arguments that can be used to initialize instance variables. This can make your code more flexible and easier to reuse. Use the this keyword. The this keyword refers to the current object instance and can be used to refer to instance variables or methods. Using this can make your code more readable and less error-prone. Avoid redundant code. If you have multiple constructors that perform similar operations, consider using a single constructor and providing default values for the arguments. This can help reduce the amount of redundant code in your class. Use a static factory method when appropriate. In some cases, it may be appropriate to use a static factory method instead of a constructor. For example, if you want to create an object, this is a subclass of a particular class. You can use a static factory method to create the object and return it as a parent class. Follow the naming conventions. Constructor names should be the same as the class name and should begin with a capital letter. This makes it easy to identify constructors in your code. By following these best practices, you can write more efficient, maintainable, and readable code in Java. The importance of constructors in object-oriented programming. Constructors are important for object initialization, encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, and readability and maintainability of your code. That's all for today. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe.